Episode 311 of the TV Dudes, recorded December 9th, 2020. Get real. It's time for us to get real. We're talking about going gearless and Megalo Box on Netflix, looking into the real world of the Marvel Universe on Disney's 616, the behind-the-scenes stories of Elf and Nightmare Before Christmas on the holiday movies that made us over on Netflix, or the disturbingly real comedy of Natalie Palamides on Nate, a one-man show, also on Netflix. But before we get to all that, I'm Randy.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Les.
And we're the TV Dudes.
Yeah, and I just figured out why Les was singing 311 earlier when you said what episode it was.
You were just going along with it. You're like,
yeah,
oh,
I was like,
you know,
okay, a little bit of a throwback.
That's true friendship. That without catching the reference, you just backed my play on 311.
I know this chorus.
So we are closing in on the end of the year again here, guys. We've got, I think next week will be our last episode that's like our regular episode. And then we're going to do a two-part best of 2020. Believe it or not, 2020 did have some best of things in television. The rest of the world's a garbage fire, but the television was okay. So I don't know what we're going to talk about next week because there's a couple things coming up, but I don't think you guys are going to be able to catch up on Expanse since it's season 5. So I don't know if we'll talk about that. But we'll see. There's some stuff. We may make a potpourri of other stuff we wanted to get in before the end of the year. Mm-hmm. This week we're closing out our Patreon request for the year with Megalo Box, another anime. We've watched more anime this year than any previous year.
I know that my wife thinks that I'm into anime now because like she wanders out from like her office because everybody's working from home and she'll like walk past me on the couch in the middle of the day or something and I'm just like casually watching anime and I feel like I constantly have to yell out that like she gives a shit. Like I have to yell out like, oh no, this is a Patreon that she's like, whatever, you're fucking
this is anime. For the show. Yep. I've done the same thing.
I found myself hiding with the laptop on the back porch. Like I never watched TV like this. This is the only time. It's like I'm trying to hide my anime.
We got the full anime experience. We're ashamed of ourselves.
No,
honey. Someone paid me $20 to watch Pornhub.
That's so much worse. You see how that's worse.
It's my OnlyFans account. You pay me to watch Pornhub.
We also got into a couple documentary shows. The holiday movies that made us surprise me. I guess I should have known that was coming. I think, Les, you probably did an interview related to this.
Yes. Yeah, we talked to Brian Volk-Weiss again. He's always fun. And so that interview's up today, actually. We'll have been up for a couple days now.
And like we love the toys that made us, we love the movies that made us, and so I was glad to see this pop up. And even though it's just 2 episodes, it's really good. 616 is 8 connected Marvel documentaries, and another was a pleasant surprise. Mm-hmm. And then, Les, you had another interview that led us down the rabbit hole of this Nate one-man show thing.
Yes. So Brian Volk-Weiss directed the holiday movies that made us episodes, but he, through his company Comedy Dynamics, produced a ton of stand-up comedy specials, but they produced Natalie Palamides' show Nate, a one-man show, and so it was doing the interview that turned me on to both of them coming out at once because they're very different, and even though they both dropped the same day, I didn't really know about Nate, and then I sat and watched that.
It's wild, and we're going to talk about that.
Then I made Randy watch it.
But before we get to all of that, it is time for the Power Ranking.
The Power Rankings. Let's get rank.
Guys, it's coming in on the end of the year. We are piling on the shows, in terms of what we've watched for the year. And one thing that's been consistent throughout this entire year, all the way to the end, is for each show we've watched, we've gone online, we've dug through the internet, we've looked up the IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, and the Metacritic rankings, and we've internet trolls definitely don't watch TV or talk about it on the internet.
Man, there was some stuff in here, Kyle, where I was like, did Kyle put his British finger on the thumb in this ranking?
It does happen like that, but what we started it's funny, I know what you're talking about there. We started power rankings last year, kind of towards the end of the year. So we actually did the third season of that show, and I think it was also ranked like top 10, but we also only had like 2 months worth of shows, so I think the list was like 20 shows long.
The internet, like Kyle, loves the British.
The internet loves weird stuff, but I feel like if you put it all out on the table, it would make sense. Like, oh, I get it.
Look, I'm not going to spoil anything for people who are getting the power rankings, but I'm just say, if they were doing an animated version of that, it would probably be the number one show, or maybe a documentary about the making of it, or an animated documentary about the making of it.
Oh, we got some of that coming too. But the thing about British shows that people love is the accents,
Yep.
Kind of like when you have an Australian accent, but you do an American accent like 90% of the time, like in The Undoing over there on HBO, which we talked about last week and has a 285 out of 400 when you look at all the sites. It is tied 94 on our list with Altered Carbon and A Haunting of Bly Manor. Just 1 point ahead of Miracle Workers over on TBS, which again I think is a super underrated. The medieval times one, Miracle Workers was a lot of fun, and I hope they do a season 3 of that. After COVID and all that. But The Undoing, 94 on our list, not a great spot. Moving up a little higher, this actually got about 6 points from season 1 because we actually talked about season 1 back in January. That's The Unicorn over on CBS. Whereas,
do you know where this was on our where it was on our previous list?
It was only a few points down because I had actually run all the numbers with its original ranking and then realized I hadn't checked it, and it went up about 4 points. So I think it was tied with Little Fires Everywhere and unfortunately Star Trek Discovery, which is kind of low on our list right now.
So weird, yeah.
Yeah, but it squeezed its way up. Its little unicorn horn just poked up on our list, poked up into that number 81 spot with Enola Holmes, which I don't know the age there. Maybe that unicorn horn joke wasn't appropriate. But the two of them, Enola Holmes and the Unicorn on CBS, are tied in 81 with a 296, this was kind of an interesting find from this week. Usually, if you had 300 points, you were like in the running. Like that was... pretty good territory. So number 78 on our list is Shrill season 2 over on Hulu, which was really good. With a 301, but that's 78, meaning we watched 78 shows this year that have a 300 or higher ranking, which usually is you should go check it out.
Yeah.
If you believe the aggregator sites.
I love the idea of like a Moneyball style industry that could go into how we do our power rankings. Like there could be another podcast of like TV dude nerds who break down like whether the algorithm's fair to shows this year.
The TV dudes.
behind the TV dudes. I'm all for it.
And that podcast is going to outdo us.
That's the thing. Yeah.
As long as it's not Disney Gallery presents the TV dudes, because then it's going to be critically acclaimed. They're going to hate our show. They're going to love that show.
Yep.
And it's going to be like, but that's my voice they're talking about. Anyways, the internet is weird, is what the power rankings tell us.
Yes, this is true.
A little higher. Again, Well, actually, no. I think we were all kind of on board with the flight attendant over on
Not
HBO
all three
Max.
of us were not. No,
No,
We
Randy
weren't
was not
number
sold.
60 spot. Not digging it.
I disembarked from the flight attendant.
It's funny. We were going through the list earlier before the show, and I was talking to my wife, and she's like, "A lot of those shows you mentioned, we only watched the first couple episodes of because that's all that was out when you guys talked about it." So it's like I made a little list of like, here's all the stuff I need to catch up on. But that's one I'm going to go back to. Tied in the number 52 spot with the capture over on Peacock is Supernatural. I just put an infinity sign for the season because what season is it?
There's an A in it, I think. In the numbering.
It's a Roman numeral at this point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's like a Mario crown.
320. Not only is that a really good score on the list, but this thing's been around so long, it has got tons of reviews, like way more reviews than our average show. Yeah. So this is like definitely where this show should probably live in terms of people giving it aggregation scores. But guys, moving way up to like where all the drama is. Normally, the top 10 stays pretty well intact. Mm-hmm. It's the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. That's our number one, because the internet loves basketball. Followed by Dark Side of the Ring, which is the wrestling documentary. The documentary about The Mandalorian is about 10 places higher than The Mandalorian in the 14th spot.
Yep.
But beating it out, tied with The Good Place, and number 12 is The Crown, season 4 over on Netflix, where we got Princess Diana.
People love this show.
Oh, and by people, you mean me.
I do mean you, yes.
I am people.
So many of my friends were posting about this show and just binge through it. Like, this was the thing they were waiting for, and I wish I liked it. I just don't. I don't care.
I'm much more excited for The Great to come back, and I think that's because I'm a like fart joke loving junior high boy at heart or something.
Mm-hmm. The Great, like, it plays in that same area as The Crown, but it's able to turn up to 11 and get raunchy with it and kind of weird.
If you want to watch something at the apex of the two, the same person that was playing the Queen in The Crown, is that Claire Foy?
It's season 1, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Whoever it is now, the older.
Oh, that's
Olivia Colman.
Her name, yeah.
Yes, Olivia Colman. So she is in The Favorite, which is a film by the writer of The Great, where she plays Queen Anne.
Okay, all right.
That looks really good.
It's great.
I do love Queen. The thing is, I love Olivia Colman. I love Gillian Anderson. I just don't have any interest in the royal family.
I gotta take I doubt they're listening, but I gotta tip my hat off to Netflix marketing, because especially on YouTube and Instagram, which is kind of where I hang out, they had a ton of essentially like bonus feature content available on their social media. And it was like we were talking about with the Mandalorian Disney Gallery being so high on the list, like I really feel like there's a lot of talent producing that bonus content right now, and they're distributing it in much more interesting ways than like a DVD bonus feature.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So then shooting up, this is like the longest power rankings we've ever done. I feel like a real like TV analyst. Like,
there were some big moves this week.
Yeah. Big moves kind of like on a chessboard.
Right.
Because up in our number 6 spot, the Queen's Gambit, a 360. I knew the score was high. Like every number I looked up, I was like, oh, look at that number. Like, it's going to make it. Oh.
I mean,
I always forget I forget which shows move like an L. But anyway.
This is one of those.
It's up in the top 10. It's between BoJack Horseman and Young Justice, which is weird.
Yeah.
As what I'm saying, if you did an animated version, of the Queen's Gambit, it would probably be the number 1 show.
Do you know how intense all of like the speed lines coming off the chess pieces and like the dust off the pawn, like
Yep.
No, I saw some I guess fan art, but it was kind of the Spider-Verse style. I mean, the Queen's Gambit Spider-Verse. Oh. But yeah, that's the power rankings for this week. A lot of shows we talked about last week, trying to fit them all in at the end of the year.
Yeah. I gotta say, the Queen's Gambit, I liked it. It was really good, but it just didn't, for whatever reason, didn't hit me the same way it hit everybody else. But man, I'm seeing memes all over the place. There's a great one that crossed it with Parks and Rec's Conan's Dunshire, which was fantastic.
Nice.
So it is definitely like the buzz show. Like Netflix has a huge hit on their hands, and unfortunately, I think that's it. Like it's a one-off show. They're not going to do a sequel of The Queen's Gambit.
Gosh,
So-
it stinks because it's fictional. They totally could.
Yeah,
Hear me out.
Yeah.
She's an orphan girl who who only has these broken sentient robot chess pieces, like Pinocchio style, from her parents, and she repairs them, and then in between each game she has to fix them all back up when they get damaged. But they actually like are little robots, so that the knights fight and like the chess pieces do their thing, all anime style.
Les,
there we
have
go.
you become an anime fan? Is that what's happening
I wouldn't
here?
watch it, but I'm saying.
I personally, I blame our patrons, and this is a good place to remind you that you can support us by going over to patreon.com/tvdudes. Throw us $1 an episode. In exchange, we get to keep up with streaming services, pay for our hosting costs. You get bonus content each week. This week, we're pausing our John Carpenter marathon because we thought it was time to do a little Christmas talk. So we talked.
Yes, I believe we had
movies this week.
a clause in our contract.
We were supposed to watch The Thing, but as soon as the snow came on, I started doing Snow Angels and got distracted.
We also have our $20 sugar level, which lets you add 2 shows into our rotation. We have the last show in that docket from Charles Armstrong, who last couple weeks we watched Great Pretender. This time we were watching Megalo Box.
Fun
And
fact:
guys-
if you combine these, it would be Digstown.
I don't know what that means.
Do you not? Have you not ever seen the movie Digstown? It's a
Nope.
boxing con artist movie.
Oh, well, I
And
kinda
if they
need
made
to
an
see
anime of it, it wouldn't have to star James.
I'm imagining a mix between Real Steel and Holes.
I'd watch that too.
that. Yeah, same. All right, let's jump in and let's talk about Megalo Box.
Ba-dum-bow.
So the previous one we watched was a con man thing, and that's right in my wheelhouse. This is a boxing movie. I mean, this is your boxing stories, right? Like this
Yeah.
is the scrappy underdog who wants to take on the champ. It's very much a Rocky, Creed, that kind of thing, and I have a fondness for, but not a love for those. So I was like, okay, I'll check this out. And it also, they use like robot arms to box.
Yes, yeah, they added tech to boxing, and it doesn't make anything safer. It makes it so much worse.
Yeah. It's also very much like a tournament style movie.
Yeah.
Where even if it's not like one tournament where they're trying to progress through, there's like different challenges per episode and like different, foes that our hero has to take on as he kind of works his way up.
Well, he fights the champ in the first episode, and then the whole season builds back to their rematch, basically.
Right. Because the champ comes down to his gym, and the champ's like, hey, you want to fight me again?
Yeah,
You got to come to my gym.
yeah. Like all anime, it lays all of it on thick.
Yeah.
And I feel like glosses over. I mean, and this isn't particular to Megalo Box. This is just like an anime shorthand kind of vibe that I always get off the plots, where I feel like we just skip over some stuff of like, how are you named what? Like, junkyard dog, like what?
Right.
Past doesn't. I wanted to bring this up particularly because Randy, I know you'll at least know what I'm talking about here. In comics, often you can go read like the Wikipedia summary of an X-Men plotline, for instance,
And it looks like someone's having a stroke.
well, I mean, it sounds like this amazing epic thing, and then if you go and look at those single issues, often like the biggest villain that made some world-changing impact is 10 panels across 2 issues of 2 different series, and like if you actually look at the page time and the dialogue, they said this huge event is carried in like 2 lines and some panels.
Yeah.
And I feel like that in anime sometimes, and we'll discuss it a little bit differently in the Marvel 616 documentary about Japanese Spider-Man, but there's a fundamental difference in the storytelling, and I feel like it keeps me from getting quite as invested the same way in anime.
There was part of me watching this, like, that was thinking about the story, like, oh, this seems like easy storytelling. Like, I feel like I could write stories like this and be so successful. And then I thought, how awful would that be if I took that logic and like went to Japan or wherever they make anime and was like, here are my stories. And I did like 8th grade level action guy punches bad guy in face before kisses hot lady. And then they were like, no, this is awful.
This is terrible.
It's just like what
Are you making fun of us? Yeah.
No, this is the same.
I was not as taken with this as I was with, say, Great Pretender or that was the one we liked.
Carol and Tuesday.
Oh, Carol and Tuesday.
I was not as taken with this, but I didn't hate this.
No, same.
I thought it was. I liked the characters well enough. I thought the animation style was particularly good here. I liked the sort of grittier style.
Same. So I didn't like the characters on Great Pretender. I didn't like the animation as much on Great Pretender. But then y'all pointed out the backgrounds, and the more I looked at it after y'all mentioned how good the background, wow, like they're great. I liked everything about Carol and Tuesday. On this one, even though this to me feels, I know it's not old school animation or anime style. This is really like 80s, but it looks like any number of anime characters that I saw early morning on weird channels in the 80s could pop up in this animation style. Like this looks like what I think of as anime, but at the same time, top notch done. Like this is really nicely done. The boxing scenes particularly are great.
Yeah, the world is really inhabited. Like when he's out on his bike and he has the bike accident. Like I don't want to say Akira vibes, but there's a little bit of that. It's like you get this empty road and this sort of the you feel a lived-in world. Like this felt like a built-in world.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel that the character design for Gearless Joe, who is that his name throughout the show? We're introduced to him as stray dog with no name.
Yeah, he's just Junk Dog, and then he chooses his name. Which is
Joe. Anyways,
he chooses Joe.
Especially, when the character gets the scar on the face and he becomes Joe, I felt like they were flirting with that character design of Little Mac from Punch-Out on NES.
A little bit.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, let's make sure to put a scar on his face.
I can see that.
I'm wondering the same color uniform.
I'm wondering if because this show is like a nod to a manga, like the anniversary of a manga or something like that, right? If I remember right.
Oh, I'm not sure.
And so I'm wondering if it's.
I thought it sounded like a new video game console. Like there's a Megalo Box now,
right?
Is that like the Soldier Boy console?
Yeah. So 50th anniversary of the manga Ashita no Joe.
Okay. All right.
And so I'm wondering, a part of me is wondering if Tyson's Punch-Out was also based off maybe this, like Ashido no Joe.
That seems entirely possible, actually. Now that you say that, yeah.
I've actually seen a documentary on the making of Punch-Out, and I know that I can't speak for the character designs, which probably actually that's probably where I'm getting the comparisons, but I know in terms of the names, like all of that was super Americanized because in the arcade they had names like Cocaine Joe, but then for home console he had to become like Soda Pop Joe, right? Yeah, apparently arcades used to be seedy places, not for children.
They did. I grew up in that time period, and there's it's definitely a little sketchier.
Have you guys seen, they have this, it's granted it's quite different, but they actually have this Nintendo game. It's like their new boxing game called Arms, where your character has like robotic arms they throw around the arena. And I kept thinking like it would be cool if the combat kind of went in that direction.
Oh man, I can totally see that. Yeah, my kid has that on Switch, and I've definitely seen that. I can totally see that being an influence or vice versa. So I think as anime goes, we're still not the anime dudes, but I didn't finish this. I didn't get all the way through it. There was a lot of stuff to watch this week.
I watched about half of it straight through, and then I jumped to the end and watched the last two. So I've seen most of it at this point. I liked it, but I mean it's pretty. If
it doesn't
at this
have.
point, I've watched so much anime. I feel dumb saying if I liked anime, I'd like this, but it's really good.
One of the big things that's not pushing it over the edge and being great, and why I also did half a season of this, or 6 rounds, as I said earlier. it doesn't have one of those killer soundtracks like Great Pretender or Carol and
true.
Tuesday, which was all about the music. And especially in 2020, I have just really kind of renewed my appreciation for like going the extra mile and having great music in cinema, kind of like we're going to talk about in a minute with A Nightmare Before Christmas on the holiday movies that made us. But I think if it had something like that to push it over the edge, or more of an intrigue plot, because this actually did remind me of something like, you know, Dragon Ball Z is the generic example, or if you're familiar with it, Mortal Kombat, where it's like, oh, we don't know who he has to fight, but we know where we're going. You know, we kind of get X amount of steps. If the story continues on past this, I imagine either this foe is going to be completely defeated or they're going to become an ally, which is kind of cool. But every episode just seemed like, do we really need all these different fights to kind of get to where we were going? And maybe we did, but
so neither of y'all saw the ending. Is that right?
No,
Nope.
correct.
Okay. All right.
You want to spoil it?
I'm happy to. So he fights Yuri, the champ. They fight gearless in the last episode, both of them, and they go like a shitload of rounds, and it's an absolutely weirdly brutal fight that doesn't feel like anybody has a particular advantage. It feels like Joe's getting the shit beat out of him for most of it, and then they throw like one last punch, and you don't really see the outcome of it, and they cut away, and it's obviously really sad. And then there's like a stinger where they have a gym going now, and you see them all together, and Yuri's in a wheelchair. Like Joe put Yuri in a wheelchair in the last fight. I don't know if he's healing up or if it's always there, but it's a weird ending. It's not a dark ending there. They don't think it's dark, like the music and shit. But I was sitting there like, did he put him in a fucking wheelchair?
I don't know. There was something reassuring that I did not like this on the same level as Great Pretender or Carol and Tuesday, because I feel like that's when you know you went full anime. We just dabbled. None of us went full anime this year. Yeah, we just dipped our toes in
a little bit.
Yeah,
I feel like we're $60 away from full anime, dude.
I'll tell you what I did go all in on, though, and that is Marvel 616 around Disney Plus, because I mean, this was pretty much marketed right to me. This is all behind the scenes, but you never know what you're going to get. And Disney Plus is not like an established place for documentaries quite. I mean, they are. They've got National Geographic and all that kind of stuff. But I wasn't sure if this was just going to be a puff piece, you know? Is this going to be like, look how great Disney is and look how great Marvel is?
I mean, those Parks documentaries were bizarrely good. I weirdly enjoyed those.
The Pixar one's good too.
And obviously the Mandalorian documentary is the greatest thing Star Wars has ever done.
One of the best shows ever done.
Highest rated Star Wars.
so this, as I understand it, is like 8 documentary movies that they put together under the brand of 616. But it's not a series. You don't have to watch them in order. You can watch any ones you want. There's no like overarching plots or anything like that.
Although I do want to get your guys' ideas about different orders you could watch this in, because I had some thoughts.
Did y'all watch holiday movies that made us before this or after this?
After.
The pacing difference in those two documentaries, the style difference is astonishing.
That's one thing. That's one thing I'm going to talk about is that I feel I've several of my friends have said things about that they think it's overly long and could have used an edit, and I think that's a fair complaint to have there, especially the first one, Japanese Spider-Man, and the second one, The Higher for the Faster, about the women at Marvel. They do run long. Like they let the story just play out, and I do think probably you could have edited it down to a tighter, shorter run.
Well, and I think that's because this is, in the truest sense of the word, an anthology. Like, I imagine probably at one point these projects could have all existed in different areas, because I do see where a couple of these look like they might have been paired together. Or the Japanese Spider-Man one, I could see where that would have been its own documentary and they would have taken that to film festivals, entered it in documentary short.
Right.
So the pairing of these does seem a little some assembly required.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that one. But overall, the quality I feel like is up with like not just MCU type stuff and like what Marvel has done lately, but with like Disney Plus content, like all those shows we were mentioning earlier,
Yeah.
like the Imagineers.
I'm not a huge documentary guy. I know, Kyle, you're a bigger documentary guy than I am.
Ken Burns all the way.
But I'm a huge Marvel guy, and so I loved these. I do think it's interesting. Did you guys notice behind the camera talent that two members of Community directed these? Gillian Jacobs
I only caught one.
and Alison Brie both directed an episode.
Man. So the Russo brothers direct all the big Marvel movies.
Yep.
And now two Community actors are directing.
Yep.
Oh my gosh! And the Rick and Morty guys are doing Doctor Strange. Like, get everything off Dan Harmon's jock for real.
so I want to real quick just talk about the 8 episodes, just like give people a rundown. I think they're all worth watching. We'll each name our favorites, I think. But first episode is Japanese Spider-Man. The second one is Higher, Further, Faster, which is about women at Marvel. The third is Amazing Artisans, which is about a couple of Spanish artists who work for Marvel. The fourth one is Lost and Found, which is Paul Scheer making almost a mockumentary about making an animated series about obscure Marvel property, Brute Force.
Or I thought of that one as kind of like a documentary about like how properties are developed, how you go from like the Favreau Iron Man to the lunchboxes and stuff.
5 is Suit Up, which is all about cosplay. 6 is Unboxed, which is all about action figures. 7 is The Marvel Method, which is a sort of a focus on Dan Slott, one of their big writers, and bringing a big property and dealing with writer's block and all that kind of stuff. And it's the most comic book of all. Maybe Higher, Further, Faster, and Amazing Artisans are like directly about Marvel Comics. And then the last one is Spotlight, which is about, I guess Marvel has a program where they put in high school theater. They have plays based on the first issue of Miss Marvel and the first issue of Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And they just give these plays out to high school, or you buy them as high school production departments and put them on. And that was by far my favorite episode.
Well, it was like a much better version of that. What's the other show on Disney Plus?
Oh, where they go back and redo their high school theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that
where Kristen Bell's not in it but is hosting it.
Yeah. This was like a much better version of that, and I about halfway through was like, oh crap, not only are these high school kids that are doing a theater production, but they have camera crews in their face while they're doing it. Like, this has to be super stressful as is, but then the camera crews exacerbate everything.
Well, I really loved how they got into the sort of the angst of it, and like the anxiety that the girl playing Miss Marvel had, and everyone was like not sure she was going to be able to get past her stage fright and be able to do it. And the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, who's very much about sort of the body positivity of the whole thing. And that it was like it sort of, and they did this with all the people playing characters. They talked to all the kids, and all of them were having their own personal issues, and it was all related to like how being in this play kind of helped them grow as a person. And again, it could have easily been like propaganda, but instead, I found it very heartwarming and very affecting. Like I was definitely moved by this one. I thought it was really good.
I'm glad you mentioned the propaganda thing, because I've actually heard about this before this episode, and I didn't research it much because my initial thought is that because I'd heard of like there's the Spider-Man musical, and I was like, if there's a Spider-Man movie coming out next year and they're selling toys and they've got fast food tie-ins and all this other stuff, is it then ethical to have a children's play where they're doing a Spider-Man play, where you're essentially marketing? But then when I saw the two plays that they were doing, one, which the message, the Miss Marvel one, the message kind of seemed like, doing the right thing, even if you don't get credit for it. Yeah. And then Squirrel Girl was all about body positivity. And I felt like those messages seem like really great messages to have in high schools. And it's not like they're trying to sell Miss Marvel and Squirrel Girl lunchboxes at the same time.
Right. They don't have to. Those things sell themselves.
Given the quality of the school assembly events that I went to in Texas public schools, I don't feel like There's still a school in Dallas that has the Dr. Pepper logo painted across its roof.
Did any of you guys go, how are they going to do the big fist?
I thought the stuff they did with costumes was really good. Miss Marvel's one of my favorite comics, and I thought seeing it adapted into like a high school, and it is definitely a hard on your sleeve modern day Spider-Man, you know, power and responsibility, all that kind of stuff. And I thought translating all that for high school kids and also having messages about, you know, acceptance of other people and that Miss Marvel is a Muslim teenager, like all that stuff, and that Squirrel Girl is basically about like smart kids. It's real genius, but with superpowers. Like there's such cool little quirky elements to these that they did this instead of like a play where it's Daredevil and Punisher taking down drug dealers. You know, I like they found the stuff that works in high school.
Also, I just think it's cool that their company is thinking about this. Like they have people who are like, well, we have to adapt this for schools, you know, like let's work on that and let's actually make these things have positive messages. That would be an awesome job.
That was my favorite. What was y'all? Les, what was your favorite of these?
So I watched the Further, Faster, Stronger one. So like I think I've watched 4 of them.
Okay, yeah.
So the Spanish Artist one, the Japanese Spider-Man one, and Paul Shear's Brute Force one.
Yeah.
All of them are 20 minutes too long for me.
They're all long. I mean, that's
like they're just all a hair long. I mean, it's not bad if I don't know. I wasn't ever in none of those 4 was I hooked enough to not notice the time going. But I want to watch the Dan Slott one, and it sounds like even though the high school play one didn't appeal to me at all in the description, it sounds like that one might be worth watching too.
Oh, it's great. I would highly recommend it.
I've enjoyed all of them. I just haven't like loved any of them.
That's fair.
The big difference between this and that Kristen Bell one is when it's adults coming back to do a high school play, it's not the same stakes as like you're doing a high school play in front of people you know. So like you know that it's real for these kids. And when you see them get stuff right and they get a little confidence boost, like you get that joy and that emotion they're experiencing. It's good.
Yeah. Kyle, what about you? What was your experience with this?
Oh my gosh, had tons of feelings. I feel like I was blowing up our chat as I was watching these. Because the thing is that 20 minutes too long thing doesn't work for this anthology. But if these were standalone documentaries, I don't think we would notice it. And I think these could have all been released that way if they wanted. With I think maybe you combine like the cosplay and the toy one.
I can see that.
I could see where those would have some crossover. And then I actually found a weird crossover between the Dan Slott episode, The Marvel Method, which was all about like storytelling and essentially like creating it from scratch and working with existing properties and then working in creative teams. The one where Amazing Artisans about the Spanish artists working for Marvel abroad. And then that Paul Scheer one, which really felt like this is how we develop properties. You know, we start with this person did it. Now we're going to renew it. We're going to make toys. We're going to do TV shows, all this. And it was like one of the most realistic or maybe just put together portrayals of like how they work, the kind of their behind the scenes. Like Pixar does a lot of this, but I haven't seen as much of this that isn't like artist focused. Or like kind of spotlighting like a particular thing. But then out of those 3, Amazing Artisans, the one about the Spanish artists, really touched me because, you know, a through line through all these is kind of this like, you know, like feeling like an outsider, you know, like you don't belong where you grew up. And then like, you know, finding these characters or finding, you know, kind of this fandom is like, oh, now I've found my people. And no matter how much of an outsider you feel like, I mean, being in another country, you know, and wanting to work for Marvel one day, but it being in America and you're in Spain, like there's nothing that seems more of a long shot to me, maybe another planet. But, you know, to see them and like talk about, oh, no, we just kept working. And now we work for Marvel and we live in Europe and we drink at, you know, fantastic coffee shops. And that dude who draws Miles Morales is also like kickboxing badass too. I'm just like, oh, that is so cool.
You know, you talked about there being a little bit of crossover with Dan Slott. Now you say that. Pete Woods, a guy I actually know a little bit because I used to run in comic circles a lot. more so than I do now. He is. I knew that guy when he was doing like Robin, which was probably 20 years ago now. But I did not know that he was like living in an RV and just kind of drawn on the beach. Where like that is the coolest thing to me. You can you can just do your job wherever. You just get on a beach and draw on your iPad. And
as long as you make your deadlines,
like,
fuck yeah.
Like that is crazy to me.
Yeah.
And the freedom of being able to do that. Like I was not cut out for the freelance lifestyle. It's too stressful for me. But if I could handle the freelance lifestyle, if I had that kind of talent, that's like dream job territory. Like being able to just be wherever you want, just travel and still do your job. That's amazing.
The Spanish artist talking, it caught me off guard. It was a tiny thing. It just tripped me out. The Spanish artist talking about seeing X-Men cartoon in the 90s. And like this happened on a couple of the documentaries. Like a lot of these outsiders, oddly, were super drawn to the X-Men. Like most of us weird outsider kids were. But they talked about the woman who draws Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, I think, talked about seeing the X-Men cartoon in the 90s in Spain. And then like, and then I fell in love. I was just obsessed with it. And then I found out there were comics. Like my jaw fell open because like I remember the X-Men 90s cartoon. I was a super animation snob at the time because like Batman the Animated Series came out around the same time, and the X-Men cartoon looked like trash to me.
Yep.
And I hated watching it. I wouldn't watch it. I didn't give a shit about it because I'd already read all these great stories that they were just turning into this awful art style. And so it blew me away in these documentaries. Like I'm always astonished by the sheer love for the 90s X-Men cartoon. But it's because I forget that that's how a lot of people first met the X-Men.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my wife. That's she got into the X-Men off of that cartoon. Like it's Les, you and I both were Claremont fans, so we've read all
been reading those
stories
for years before that cartoon ever came out. Yeah.
But the thing is, the heart of those stories is still there. Like it's different. Like they've added in Jubilee and Cable and Gambit and the Dark Phoenix saga, and it's weird as shit. And the animation is not great, but the heart of those stories, Days of Future Past, and all that stuff is there. And whether you were someone who didn't know the X-Men and just like got the power of those stories from the cartoon, or you were an X-Men fan who was just delighted to see your stuff being translated so vividly and faithfully, even if it wasn't that faithful, that the animation and the voice work and all the stuff that was so cheesy, you just overlook it.
I think currently my favorite episode is actually still the Japanese Spider-Man one.
Interesting. Okay.
And it's I like what they point out about the difference in like why Marvel wasn't working in Japan, that we want to read our comics and they need more actiony panels, and the give and take that brought to putting out Marvel comics in Japan. But then just the weird changes, and the guy like, I don't know why I made it a Sphinx. Nobody argued with me. All that shit was just great. I like Japanese Spy. I saw those as a kid and was like, what the fuck are these?
If I was going to take one of these documentaries to market, I'd take that Japanese Spider-Man one. I think that'd be a really easy sell. Like it's really great, especially as the first episode in here, but it could definitely stand on its own pretty good.
So the through line for all of this for me, and Japanese Spider-Man included, is this is a thing that is really close to my heart. I think this is probably why it struck a chord for me, is that so much of who I am was built on comics. Like it's what I do for a living. It's what I did for a hobby and a living for a long time when I was a reviewer of comics, when I ran a comic website. It definitely formed a lot of my morality and that kind of stuff. So plugging into like comics as the foundation of your life, I thought it was really interesting. And there's a through line of that in all of this. There's the creation of Miss Marvel and how personal it is for, I'm blanking on her name now, Sana Amanat, I believe. And G. Willow Wilson, and how personal Miss Marvel is for them, and Natasha Bustos and Javier Garron talking about, what working on Marvel meant for them, and the cosplay, and the fact that there's a non-binary person who talked about like this allowed me to start exploring my gender. I could just dress up as Doctor Strange one time, and the girl who like gets along with dogs but not people, who could go out and interact with people, and the guy whose wife got into his hobbies and started dressing as Sharon Carter, like. There's all this exploration of the outside the norm, and it's queer friendly. It's diversity of religion and race, and the notion that comics are a place for everyone that these things mean something to people is just, it's super powerful to me. And that extends to the kids sort of getting through anxiety and that kind of thing in the theater episodes. It is all about sort of not this as a product, but this as as art, and not even as art, but as something that means something to people. And that to me is, I mean, that's why I do what I do. It is why I enjoy selling comics. Is it's not to make the money. If I want to make money, I'd go into any other business. But the notion of like putting a story you love into somebody's hands or giving something to somebody that means something to them and that will affect them, that's why we do this. And it's carried through beautifully in this series.
There was a small moment in the Marvel Method episode where the letterer was like, yeah, they sometimes give me changes 15 minutes before it goes to print. And he goes, I just save the PDF and send it. And then you see all the comics being printed. Yeah. And it's just crazy to think of a guy sitting in his house, 2020, drinking a Diet Dr. Pepper, hitting save on his computer. And then that's getting printed as a comic book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was watching the Miss Marvel episode when I saw online that Marvel announced their new Warriors.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Have you not seen that?
No, and I love the new Warriors. So,
Randy.
Oh, are you talking about the one that they announced a little while back? That was the really unfortunate attempt at non-binary representation.
Yep.
Snowflake
and Safe Space.
Yeah. No, I remember that.
I mean, Screen Time is also a pretty terrible name, but Snowflake and Safe Space are the Wonder Twins of the new Warriors. Safe Space can create force fields, but he can't occupy them himself. He can only do it to protect someone else. And Snowflake makes shuriken, or makes throwing stars that she can throw, or they can throw.
It's one of these things was like someone should have stepped up and said, guys,
I can't believe that made it out of a meeting. And I'm in the middle of like an hour-long documentary about how Marvel is kind of crushing it on trying these things that they know are going to generate hate mail. And like, I'm watching it going, you know what? This is great. This is really cool. This is what the fuck?
Yeah. I mean,
who named them that?
This is true of Marvel and DC. They're both, it's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back every time, but they're still taking more steps forward, I think, in general. So
yeah.
Okay, so
good numbers.
Let's divert over to the other one this time, which is the other documentary, which is the holiday movies that made us. There were just 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm. I wanted there to be more of these.
There was kind of 3. I kind of want to lump in the Home Alone episode of the movies that made us.
That's fair. Fair. This would have belonged there.
Because we'll talk about this in a second, but definitely the style. You can't help but think about that one too. So while I had friends who complained that they made the Spider-Man and some of the other 616 were too long, I think it might have been the same friend saying that, hey guys, we're not at a disco. You don't need to edit this thing quite so hard.
Yeah.
And they did. They cut in dialogue from Elf like they're a podcast that was like working the license they paid for. Like, it's like you can just say the line, man. You don't have to cut to Will Ferrell saying it.
There's definitely been like the development of a house style over all of the That Made Us shows.
Yeah.
Like I talk about that a little bit in the interview with Brian Volk, with the director, because it is almost too far the other direction. Like it is hypercut. I kind of enjoy that, but also I could see where it feels more like the difference in a PBS 13-part series about life on other planets or ancient aliens.
Yeah. And I enjoy
a bad version of this is pop-up video.
Yeah, for sure.
When you take it too far, that's what you get.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed it, but I definitely noticed it.
Yes, I'd say exactly the same. I definitely noticed their house style and brought it up in the interview, but I also didn't mind it. It makes it fun.
I thought I knew a fair amount about the nice thing about these. They always find stories I didn't know, like all the stuff they told us about Elf, and all the stuff they told us about Nightmare Before Christmas. Fascinating, sometimes funny. Sometimes you're like, oh wow, that guy's a terrible person. They just don't want to say it. But at the same time, it's like they always come with this thing of, oh my God, things almost never happen all the time. Like it's a miracle these two things we think of as like classics ever happened.
Yeah.
Wow.
Volkweiss talked about it's like access has nothing to do with how they pick their show. They pitch a bunch of shows. Somebody, if it seems like a good enough idea to go do some pre-interviews, they do a bunch of phone call interviews, and then kind of come back with the story arc. And either there's a story there or there's not. Like, it doesn't matter if they like that movie. The movie's got to hit 2 generations,
Right.
To be worth doing the documentary, and then there's got to be this kind of core to it, and it may not be what you think it is. Like
Damn,
you may
Elf
think
has hit
there's
2 generations.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Oh shit!
Elf is 20 years old. It's crazy.
Wow.
Everybody should go check the interview out, just because he also talks about if Netflix said we're done, you get one more. What is the fucked up thing you would love to do a doc on? And he talks about oh yeah, I've got one. If Netflix is like, you're never going to make another one of these, kill it.
Pornos that made us.
Right.
So of these two, I'm a bigger fan of Elf as a movie. I like Never Before Christmas, but Elf is like one of my favorites. I was just watching it earlier tonight. But I did not realize just how indie it was at the time, because you think of it now, you're like, Jon Favreau is like the Marvel guy. He did Iron Man. He did Chef. I already knew who he was from Friends at this point. Like, I knew who he was.
Yeah.
But nobody else did. He'd only made Swingers.
And I forget that he wrote Swingers. He didn't direct it. Doug Liman's
Doug Liman directed it.
The guy that did that.
And Will Ferrell, they're like, yeah, Will Ferrell was just the SNL guy. And I'm like, holy shit, there was a time I didn't know Will Ferrell was like a big giant star.
Yeah, I had no idea the timeline on Old School dropping while they were making Elf. And that that you mean the cheerleader dude from SNL?
Yeah. And it's crazy because they talk about some of the potential other casting, and it's like, man, if you had cast anybody else in this movie, it wouldn't have worked. And then
Jimmy
they talk Jimmy the Dream, man. James Caan, the troublemaker actors who want to be known as not troublemaker actors. It's always hilarious to hear those stories.
Yeah, I enjoyed so I watched the Elf one first. I came way late to Elf, watching it at all. I love it now, but I'm not a huge Will Ferrell fan, and it's always been a grudging is this going to be good? Same with Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I'm not a Sandberg fan. It took me forever to get dragged over to that show, and it's wonderful. I love Elf, so I loved this documentary. I am done with Tim Burton at this point in my life. I hated the last couple of Tim Burton movies. I don't give any shits about whatever he does next. So I was sad that there were only 2 episodes of this, and one of them was Nightmare Before Christmas, because I think I know everything about that fucking movie. I loved that one because I saw it. I mean, I skipped a school dance to go see that in the theater. I was that nerd. And no, that episode's there was so much I didn't know about it. I had no idea the degree to which Tim Burton didn't do anything on that movie.
Me neither. And it's a marketing thing that was so fascinating.
I mean, it is his style, but
but basically it was like he was off making Batman Returns.
Yes, and Harry Selick directed that movie. I did not.
I didn't know it either. And it's funny. I guess some of the film nerds do, because I mentioned to my buddy who used to work in a video store, and I'm like, "Did you know that Tim Burton?" He's like, "Yeah, Henry Selick directed." I'm like, "Oh, okay, you knew." But they talk about that at the end of how the marketing, they were like, oh, Tim Burton's huge, and that's why they put the name on it. But the whole thing about them putting it out through Touchstone because Disney didn't want it, and
Disney they'd already thrown away Frankenweenie. They've since reclaimed Frankenweenie, and you can go watch it on Disney Plus. But for the long time, Disney was like, it's too weird.
Well, it's interesting because we're not going to talk about it this week. We'll talk about it on the Patreon next week. But the thing is another one of these things that was critically just not successful, and now it's like a classic. And seeing things like this where I'm like, wait a minute, there was a time when this wasn't popular?
Mm-hmm. I remember it being kind of a meh when it first came out. My friends were generally like, nah.
Yeah. I remember that too, being the general tone, which I find interesting because something it's arguable. I feel like Beetlejuice nowadays is perfectly fine for kids. The few kind of adult jokes, they go over kids' heads. But whether or not it was made for kids back then, is debatable. But what's not debatable is the Beetlejuice cartoon, which very much had the Tim Burton style. And granted it's probably, dated now, but as a kid, I was in that, and I loved it. I loved all the monsters. I loved the comedy and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So this should have translated really well. And I feel like it wasn't until I got a little older and I started to appreciate it more for the art style and the music than like when I was a child, which that's who Disney was selling movies to. So
Yeah.
it makes sense that they wouldn't really know how to market this towards a different, a smaller audience.
I think I was a sophomore in high school and skipped a school dance that I would have not danced at, and instead went to see Nightmare Before Christmas in the theater, and was just like at the time I wanted to be an animator, and was just like, holy shit, this is the greatest.
Yeah.
And I can't remember. I honestly can't remember when I saw this. I probably saw it in the theater in college, but I don't remember. My favorite story from this one, by the way, was I love they kept going back to Danny Elfman. And Danny Elfman, I always assumed that he just kind of transitioned. Like he was getting older. I love Oingo Boingo. And I assumed he was like, okay, well, I'm getting older. I'm going to do scores and stuff. No. They were just like, hey, do a score. And he's like, I don't know how to do a score. And they just did it.
Yeah, I didn't know
And
that
then
how abrupt that was either.
And they're like, hey, do a musical. He's like, I guess I'm doing a musical now. Like this whole thing is like an accidental fall backwards into your career, which is crazy to me.
And then he was about tired of running a band, and the Mystical Nights of the Oingo Boingo just wasn't happening.
I love it when you hear those stories. Like, I told my agent I didn't want to do it, and he said, "Will you call and tell him?" And I was like, that was too chicken to call, so I just decided to do it.
But my favorite story. This is one of those things where like you don't see it. That his girlfriend was the one who wrote the movie, but because she worked with Tim Burton on
Edward Scissorhands, she wrote Edward Scissorhands.
But then she like did some kind of faux pas where he got art directory about it, got mad at her, and he didn't ask her to write the movie.
Yep.
And so he got the guy who wrote Beetlejuice, and that guy had a cocaine problem
and is dead now.
And he spent the money that he got for writing the script on cocaine instead. And so they brought
he took his salary up his nose.
Yeah.
It's the craziest thing, and I love
the narrator's like he was supposed to be writing lines.
Yeah, I loved that. I laughed out loud. It was so good.
Yes, and that like her transformation of Sally from this like Madonna cone boobed femme fatale to like the classic still selling merch today Sally.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. If I could get a beer with anybody from this besides Danny Elfman, arguably, it'd be her.
Yeah, she's a trip.
Yeah. Also, the producer who was like, who pulled the thing on Disney was like, well, that movie you just saw, that cost $24 million.
Oh my God, she is
Love her.
I forgot who they cut to afterwards. Who's like, it might have been Selig or somebody was like, I had no idea. No, it was one of the producers. The producer that was like, I didn't know what I was doing. I worked at New Line and was like, let's do this. And they cut to him after, and he's like, yeah. So it turns out that she's like a wizard, and is the best hire that we made for the entire project.
I love that
because she knew how to navigate Disney. Like, no, this is how you do this. Watch.
Yep. Yeah, she's like, well, here's the movie, and here's the $6 million we'll have to cut out of it if you don't give us the money.
What was your favorite scene? That cost this much, so now we're down to such and such because your favorite scene's gone.
She made them fall in love with it, and then she held it hostage against $6 million. I love that.
It's just wonderful when you see somebody be exceptionally great at their job in a subtle way. Like, yeah.
These were delightful. All of these series, the Toys That Make Us,
all of that made us. Yeah, I've liked all of these so far.
And by the way, the Die Hard episode also could fit into this. So technically, there's 4 episodes. They're just under different branding.
Yes.
That's right.
But I would have liked. I would have liked to have seen Scrooge. By the way, Scrooge is one of my go-tos. I would love to see it behind the scenes.
It's not a holiday movie, but I've seen another Ferris Bueller documentary, and that would make for a really interesting. I mean, you could actually do a couple different episodes of this based around just different things that happen around the making of Ferris Bueller.
Yeah.
There's some odd shit that went into that. Like, there's a lot of stories I think on that show, on that movie.
Lots of egos and but no. I was trying to think of like what other Christmas movies, I guess, which I don't know if it would necessarily fit the style, but like a Rankin Bass documentary would be really interesting.
Yeah, that's true. It'd be interesting to see the people behind the scenes of Rankin Bass.
Oh man, that whole thing on Elf.
Yeah, that was really
it was just great. Not even.
I never made that connection until they pointed it out, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's so like right in the face of everything the movie is.
Oh yeah.
And like,
But
can
you
y'all
don't think
remove it?
Rankin
No.
Bass. You just think timeless. Yeah.
Can we change it? No.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about our last. Speaking of weird, let's talk about our last show, which is Nate, a one-man show over on Netflix. This is a comedy special. It is Les watched it, and he's like, "I'm going to talk about this," and I was like, "Okay, well, I've got a little time before we record. I'll watch this." And I texted him back on our text chain, and I'm like, "This is funny, but deeply uncomfortable. Like I could not watch this live. If I was in this audience, I would run away."
Yeah, I would have to back out. I'd go to the bathroom and stay, I think.
So, Les, tell me about this.
All right. So, Kyle, you've not seen this at all, right?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So,
No, and when you guys were describing it, it sounded crazy.
it is. So, it's a comedian, Natalie Palamides, who does this character, Nate Palomino, that has a glued on mustache, wig, head bandana, like lumberjack jacket or whatever, flannel that's like open, no shirt, bunch of chest hair glued on, camo pants with pocket, like just the whole, rides a mini bike in on stage, and it's Nate Palomino's one man show. and so you're watching like a performance piece comedian thing, and it's going to be stand up of like this guy doing guy stuff or whatever, and it very quickly turns into one of the best audience participation things I've ever seen done. I don't want to be in that room.
No, it's weird crowd work, man.
But the crowd work, I can't imagine how long it took to work. Like getting it right is such a tightrope that you watch them do, and it's wild. They start out from like talking about consent and having broke up with their girlfriend, and over the course of the show, they grope some audience members
With consent.
With consent. You just gotta ask. And they then it gets even strange. Like they end up fighting. So when I really lost it, when I texted y'all of like you gotta watch this. They call down an audience member. They ask about a couple and they've been together for a while, and then they end up fighting one of the audience members. Like both like darts off, like shirts off. So it's
wrestling.
It's wrestling. And they get mats out and everything, and like Natalie Palamides or like Nate Palomino has all this glued on chest hair and is topless and and it turns into this slap fight with a person who's not entirely comfortable fighting this person on stage topless, and that just starts the descent into like holy shit awkward.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did the best friend bit. Exactly.
Oh my God. Yeah.
They just yell someone's name until someone answers, I think.
Yeah.
Like until like not a plant. Like
No, someone in the audience
if
is
I
like,
just picked a rare enough name that I just yelled Kyle until it was weird enough that you finally went, me? And then you're my best friend for the rest of the show.
And they take a shower on stage.
Oh God, nobody drives me like you do, bud.
Complete with giant plastic penis.
Oh yeah. And then there's a date.
And then
it goes to an art class. The date goes awry.
So you know what this? And I just realized this as we're talking about. You know what this compares to is Borat.
Yes, it's somewhere between Borat and Hannah Gadsby.
Yeah, these sort of uncomfortable. Oh my God, how are they doing this? Nothing is too far.
And I normally hate this shit. Like this does not connect with me, and I think it is that the joke of this rests on how harmlessly likable the Nate character is, despite him being like a guy's guy, chauvinist guy. He's like the guy's guy friend that you just pat on the head of like, you unrepentant Tim Allen fan. Like,
I don't think. Well, it wouldn't work if it was actually a cis man doing it.
no, it wouldn't.
It would not. It would not work. It would not come off the same way. No matter. I mean, even if it was like a really nice, like it was a John Mulaney doing something like this, it would not come off. It's got to have
that.
It's got to have a different energy.
Yeah, that energy has to be there. And then at the end, it allows for this crazy fluid costume change of just literally throwing a wig on and peeling it off while going back and forth in a who crossed the line sexually. The date they both get drunk and have sex, and who's at fault, and the fluid switching between the two characters arguing about who's at fault in front of an audience that was laughing along with this character's behavior for the last hour, and it just now crossed a line, and like watching the audience deal with like, but I still like Nate as a character.
Yeah.
How wrong is this wrong? And who all it was it I'm not saying it doesn't answer any. I mean, like it doesn't lay out the answer for you or anything. And her last line of the show is great. I worked really hard on this, so I hope all of the themes and everything were just completely clear. Good night. And walks out, and like nothing's clear. I'm just set wrestling with a bunch of shit. What the fuck? So I don't know. I laughed. I cried. It stuck with me. The slap fight wrestling.
That's like the greatest punchline to the joke you just described.
Oh man, it's so. I was impressed as fuck with this. I laughed genuinely hard. My wife came from the other room and was like, "Are you okay?" Because I was just standing up with my eyes wide, like pointing at the TV, like fucking Donald Sutherland and Body Snatchers, like, and then it got real. Yeah, I would recommend everybody watch this. The same that I would recommend everybody watch Hannah Gadsby. I don't know that you'll think it's funny, but I think you ought to watch it.
That's a great recommendation.
All right,
Nate, a one-man show. Go check it out.
That will wrap it up for us this week. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Les.
Thank you, Randy.
Why, thank you, Randy.
Thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our patrons. Thank you, Charles Armstrong, for the Megalo Box Showrunner Edition. Next week will be our last regular show of 2020.
Next week, I'm going to show you what real podcasting is. We're going to go gearless.
So
it's just going to
be Micheless podcasting.
No three friends talking.
Recording. Yeah. You won't be able to hear that episode, but it's going to be great. It's going to be very gritty.
Pure.
And until that time,
TV Dude's out.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast out of Austin, Texas. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/TV Dudes.
You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TV Dudes. All the music for our show is done by our friend and original TV Dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith.
To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com. I'm Randy Lander.
I'm Les Weiler.
And I'm Kyle Scott.
Thanks for listening.